Hey folks, welcome to this afternoon session on the making of the Canva Apps SDK. My name's Brendan. You met me just earlier. I'm the head of engineering at Canva, and I'm here to kick things off by giving you a sample of how we do engineering at Canva. And then I'm going to hand over to Martin, our head of ecosystem, who is going to walk through in much more detail about our engineering journey towards shipping the Apps SDK. I want to start though by giving you an idea of how we do engineering at Canva. I can't summarize it all in the 15 minutes I've got, obviously, but I want to do that by telling you a story of where it all began and sharing some of the engineering values and principles along the way, because they give you a sense of our engineering culture. And that engineering culture has been absolutely critical to our success, and it allows you to get a sense of who we are as an engineering community. So they've been absolutely critical for allowing us to take an idea that was in Mel and Cam and Cliff's head and turning it into a powerful and robust platform that brings delight to millions of users. You're probably a little bit bored about hearing the stats, but I put some vanity metrics up here just to give you an idea of the kind of traffic that we're dealing with on the Canva platform. You've heard the 15 billion designs created to date. That's about 270 designs created every second. Our backends are handling about 800,000 RPCs a second. We do nearly 2,000 exports every second. We have 105 petabytes of user-uploaded media under management, and that's growing by 40 terabytes every single day. But let's go right back to the start of this journey when most of those metrics were close to zero. Our origin story starts like so many startup stories. There's a few of us sitting around a table. Our heads are filled with the grand visions of Mel, Cliff, and Cam. We have far much to do, and we have far too few of us to actually do it. There's this opportunity cost everywhere. And like many good origin stories, it starts with a bit of hardship and struggle. Back in the day, we're in a single room, there's dodgy aircon, there's a dodgy fuse box, and in winter we could choose between having monitors as engineers or having heaters. And so naturally we chose monitors, and you had to adapt. So there's a picture of me coding in my fingerless gloves. I want to introduce two of our engineering values here because I think they were forged in this really intense crucible of a beginning of Canva. And they are dream big, start small, and strive for pragmatic excellence. Dream big, start small gives our engineers license to embrace these crazy ambitious goals, but while focused on finding the small iterative steps towards those goals. Engineers need to embrace the crazy big future, but they need to be focused on finding small, swift steps to make progress. And ideally, each one of those steps is putting value into the hands of our users. Strive for pragmatic excellence really implores our engineers to break things down and reason about them from first principles. We want our engineers to understand the fundamentals of the problems they're solving and of the proposed solutions, because that gives them the very best chance of reaching for the right solution that carefully weighs all of the considerations and the trade-offs. And I think both of these values have been critical to our success as we've scaled, both in the number of users that the Canva platform supports, but also in the number of productive engineers that work at Canva. So back to our origin story. As believers in the product idea, we wanted to build for a future of massive scale. We knew we needed something web scale. Does anyone get that joke, by the way? Or, yep, thank you, a few people did. The prevailing thought leadership of the day was advocating microservices architectures. And if you're not familiar, a microservices architecture is an approach to developing a single application as a suite of small services, each running in their own process and communicating using lightweight mechanisms, usually HTTP. And many of the thought leaders of the day were writing about this as the fashionable choice for a startup. He's the godfather, actually, Martin Fowler, writing about it right around this time in 2014. The benefits of microservices are many. You get really great separation of concerns, you can scale various parts of the system independently, and you have this great ability to empower teams with more autonomy. Teams can run fast to develop different parts of the system concurrently and independently. But there's a trap. There are real costs. The complexity of deployment increases dramatically. The lack of transactionality across multiple independent execution units is a real headache. And in its extreme form, you get heterogeneous tech stacks where each team is free to choose its own tech stack, and that can lead to this combinatorial explosion of complexity. Now, it just so happens that most of these costs are kind of relatively fixed, or at least they kind of rise linearly. So at some scale point, if you're lucky to have the exponential growth, then the benefits of a full-blown microservices architecture clearly outweigh the costs. But as a startup, you simply don't have that scale, and you definitely don't want those costs. So striving for pragmatic excellence means seeking to really understand the microservices approach at a first principles level, and then building a monolith. As believers in the product idea, we wanted to build for a future of massive scale, but at that point, we're just a handful of engineers. We had no users and we had limited runway. So while we're holding that big dream in our heads, we built a really simple monolithic app that was running on Heroku. We used MongoDB for our design database, and we used a single MySQL instance for everything else. We knew that this would get us up and running, but ultimately it wouldn't scale. But we baked into that monolith a microservices future that allowed us to scale when the numbers came. The monolith was stateless. So that made it horizontally scalable. It was carefully designed around a set of resources and actions that were encapsulated by service APIs. And those APIs followed an agreed set of conventions to establish consistency across the code base. Transactionality was strictly at the domain level, and that means if you needed to orchestrate a larger business action, you needed to think about it in terms of distributed systems from day one, and that carried all the way through to the persistence layer. As I said, we had one MySQL database that held most of our non-design resources, but we had separate relations and we forbid joining between relations that related to different domains. These principles allowed us to tease apart the monolith relatively easy when the need for scale came, both in the number of users we were supporting, but also in the number of engineers in our team. The monolith decomposed quite easily. That single execution unit became multiple execution units, and the single database became multiple separate databases with minimal disruption to users. And as our team grew, we're able to achieve real product velocity and architectural scalability. And you can see today we've adhered to this really pragmatic approach around microservices. We have about 150 services on the back end of Canva, and we have frequent independent deployment multiple times a day. And you can see along the way we've added the tech stacks that teams are available to use. But for the longest time, we just had one, Java. We've taken a similarly pragmatic approach on the infra side. The property that the monolith was horizontally scalable allowed us to add auto-scaling very, very early. And that was essential for us handling that early exponential in traffic. We moved to an infra as code approach with Terraform in 2016, and we pushed that knowledge into our product teams so that they were empowered to operationally own the systems they're building. In 2018, we finally got to this microservices feature of per-service execution units. And then lastly, in 2020, we finally embraced containers. Now, containers were around back in 2014. You can see that the pragmatic approach here meant that we were quite conservative and waited until 2020 when we saw the need. One of the key theoretical underpinnings of microservices was actually developed far, far earlier than 2014, though. In 1967, right at the birth of modern software engineering, this hacker and OG engineer, Melvin Conway, made a profound observation that the architecture of large software systems tended to mirror the organizational structure of the teams building it. This became known as Conway's Law, and the pithy version of it is you end up shipping your org chart. Eric Raymond later restated Conway's Law with the joke that if you give the job of writing a compiler to 4 different teams, you'll end up with a 4-pass compiler. Understanding Conway's Law led us to be very intentional about our organizational design. We carefully construct teams around key systems and architect the organization to mirror our architectural goals. And a key in this is that teams have to expose consistent, composable, and well-documented APIs and then communicate with each other via those APIs. This has allowed us to grow not just in the number of users, but in the number of engineers. We now have 1,600 engineers spread right around the world, and they're all working largely autonomously with really low coupling between teams. However, architectural thinking only gets you so far when you're growing an engineering org, so I want to introduce our next engineering value, and probably our most important one, to work with empathy, humility, and generosity, which has really been key in shaping our engineering culture. Working with empathy, humility, and generosity is underlining that at its heart, engineering is a really highly collaborative, human-centered exercise. And so we are really very intentional about our collaborations. We practice empathy with each other, but also with our future selves through a culture of rigorous peer review that values written technical communication and feedback. This on the screen now is actually one of the design docs that we used to design the API that has been shipped today. We emphasize generosity and internal knowledge sharing, and we have an engineering handbook that's been internally developed with over 200 peer-reviewed and written and reviewed articles that codify all of our engineering best practices. We encourage our engineers to teach each other by presenting at our internal forums, in onboarding and other small group sessions. We strive for a culture of continuous learning. We also work hard to empower teams using a strong shift-left philosophy. We have central teams of experts that are focused on these cross-cutting concerns, but their job is not the gatekeepers of that expertise. Their job is to push that expertise into the product teams as much as possible. Security work hard to bake security thinking into product teams so that secure practices are second nature to our product teams, and security as a feature is a default mindset. Our product teams are empowered with the tools to fully internationalize their product surfaces and make them fully accessible. And we're really excited to share some of that with you through our UI kit. We push expertise and tooling into teams to enable cross-platform efforts. And we have a comprehensive set of components in that UI kit that enables that. Our QA team is similarly pushing expertise into product teams so that the teams themselves own the quality. Again, with our reliability and dev platform teams, they work hard to empower our product teams to fully own the operational aspects of the systems that they are building. We've treated our API development identically. Our ecosystem team and our API working group really empower product teams to think about the API surface to their product area, and for that API service to be thought of as a first-class product surface. This is all about empowering you with a powerful, composable, and consistent set of APIs, together with the tools and the documentation you need to get moving as rapidly as possible. The final engineering value that I want to introduce is framed as a question. How does this help our users? Canva is successful because of its obsession with user value, and we want that to permeate every aspect of engineering. This value keeps us grounded as engineers in understanding that we're not here to build technological marvels for their own sake. We're here to deliver user value, and we hope this value shines through in the care and the thought that we've put into the Canva Apps SDK, not just in the API itself, but also in the tooling and the documentation to support it. And we have many Canva engineers here today who are eager to live this value by hearing from you as potential users of this product surface. But it's also an invitation for you to join us in helping our diverse set of 135 million Canva users in ways that we haven't even thought of. I'm now going to hand over to Martin, who's going to pick up the story of how we built the actual Apps SDK. Over to Martin.
Thanks, Brendan. Thanks, Brendan. It's fantastic to hear those experiences on building Canva's engineering culture and product over the years, and how that evolution has led us to building an API. So next, I will go deeper into how we built the Canva Apps SDK, starting with our first major attempt at an ecosystem, the extensions approach. So in late 2019, we launched our first app store, which was inspired by the company's mission to empower the world to design. And we wanted to do this in the Canva way, which was to create an API and make app development as simple as possible for each part of the design process. At the heart of this app store, we built the extensions, which is a plugin model that allowed app developers to extend 3 essential design activities. First, with content extensions, user could import images, videos, embeds into their designs from any source, such as Google Drive or Typeform, and my personal favorite, Giphy. And who doesn't like Terry Crews GIFs scattered all over their presentations? I was going to put it on every slide, but that would be distracting. Then with the edit extensions, we enabled users to edit raster or vector images off platform, such as the incredibly successful background remover. And finally, publish extensions allowed users to publish their designs to any platform, such as Slack or HubSpot. Now, to build an app, a developer only needed to create a simple web service endpoint and app config, and then the plugin framework would take care of the rest. It would render the API in product and at the right time call the web service endpoint. Developers didn't have to build like sophisticated UIs or anything to bring their ideas to life. And this approach resulted in hundreds of apps, with a few very, very successful ones. But we weren't satisfied. Listening to our developers through interviews and our support channels, we realized that this approach did not offer enough flexibility. So we had the opportunity to push ourselves a lot harder to find a way to unleash the creativity of thousands of developers, everyone here today, and many more. So in order to do this, we needed to open up our platform to give access to flexible and powerful APIs that can be composed into rich apps. APIs should be interoperable so that they can be mixed and matched within a single app. We should enable developers to have maximum control of the app's user interface, and finally expose many of the key user interactions of the product over time, such as any user interaction they do in the design. This approach allowed us to go from apps that only we could imagine to apps that could enable anything our creators could imagine by combining many different APIs, such as adding elements, replacing elements, uploading media, making service calls, and much more. And rebuilding our platform in this way is a really good example of how this enables the engineering value, how this enables our users. And as Brendan has mentioned, users and developers are at the heart of every single engineering decision we make. We don't just see this thinking limited to our product and design team, and we expect every engineer, especially in our API teams, to consider the user journey and the developer journey to ensure they build delightful APIs. So to achieve this, we start off our journey with developer interviews and data insights. We then follow this with internal releases, often supported by hackathons. And then when we feel that these APIs are ready, we follow this with preview releases for our alpha and beta developers to get more feedback on our APIs. And finally, with events like today, we launch our APIs to the market. And this approach has become the table stakes of our API development at Canva. And the biggest takeaway for us over the last period of time is that dogfooding with internal releases and listening to developers during those early preview releases is massively influential in our product direction. So now that you understand the Apps SDK philosophy, it's time for us to do a bit of a deep dive into how we designed the runtime environment and brought it to life. So at the highest level, we have a few things. The app built by the developer and the Canva editor that contains the product features and the app framework itself. An app is a JavaScript bundle that loads into a sandbox iframe, and this sandbox protects our users and the Canva product from potentially unsafe code, such as leaking sensitive user information or corrupting designs. Apps then communicate to our various APIs that are available inside the sandbox. And then if you look under the hood, these APIs communicate to a message bus that marshals calls back and forth between the Canva experience and the app. The message bus speaks to an app controller, and this app controller is a great place where we can absorb breaking changes from our product teams, ensure that the product teams can evolve independently from our API. Now, to get this project started, we realized its daunting scope. We needed to build a stable, secure, sandboxed environment with a brand new build and deploy pipeline, complete with a new SDK, a seamless developer experience that doesn't introduce any breaking changes. And delivering everything at once meant that it would take a very long time before we could get anything to our app developers. So We decided to dream big and start small by iterating on the app framework over a period of a year. And this to ensure that we can get something into our developers' hands early and get that valuable feedback. But we knew that this iterative approach would also cost us like a lot of development effort. But that was okay because we would learn as we go. Also, by applying pragmatic excellence, we started hosting the App SDK in a simple S3 bucket, which was a quick solution and required a lot of manual work to get us up and running, stable and secure. Also meant that we couldn't leverage that platform that Brendan had spoken about earlier to its fullest extent, giving us like automated build checks, rollback, clarity on who changed what, unified type checking, and flexible security. And the seemingly dirty approach also raised questions from a lot of the non-API Canva engineers because we didn't leverage the full platform. But they first sought to understand the why behind our approach before critiquing it. And that enabled us to overcome a lot of dependencies in our project. So collaborations like these lie at the heart of our value to work with empathy, humility, and generosity. And all of this extra work definitely had a price, but it allowed us to rapidly prove the core Apps SDK with our internal releases, like the hackathons, and our preview releases. So once we were there and we proved the core App SDK, we could now start adding more sophistication. We started adding a gateway service to serve up our apps, which made sure that we could leverage the Canva infrastructure, and that enabled us to leverage our infrastructure tooling and security policies and all of those wonderful things. It also enabled us to introduce automated builds to improve checks, rollbacks, audit logs, and finally, it allowed us to improve our type checking for API messages, and that allowed us to simplify backwards compatibility and deprecation. And the combination of these facilities make development completely flexible within our product. And also, it allows our teams to deploy new APIs without breaking existing versions of those APIs. So looking into the future, our next steps is to introduce manifests to make our apps more portable, and then start working on command line tooling, because who doesn't love working on the command line? So I love how these engineering values came together in one story, and I'm proud how we applied pragmatic excellence to improve our product early. Cool. So now we understand the philosophy, we understand the platform. Let's look at how we prioritize APIs. Coming out of our numerous preview releases, we got excellent signals on the types of apps that people would build. These insights helped us focus on 3 key apps: creation apps to create content in designs, content apps to allow the import of text, images, and media elements, and data-driven apps to allow users to fetch data from sources and then bring it into the Canva for visualization and automation. These different app archetypes enabled us to map out the potential APIs that could power more and more sophisticated versions of these apps. So if we look at a creation app as an example, we would start off by importing images, then we would add dragging and dropping onto the design page, and later on we can start editing and adding or editing images and elements on the designs. With the later iterations, we can then combine elements into compound shapes and start connecting data to designs. And in future releases, we can continue to evolve these creation apps to richer and richer and richer APIs. So the archetypes were a massive breakthrough because they enabled us to ruthlessly prioritize which of the APIs we work on, and therefore again decrease our time to market. So establishing these core features we needed to expose gave us a minimal viable product to work towards. But it also meant that we deprioritized a lot of APIs that were already deep into development and that I still really love and definitely want to see them ship sometime soon. But at the end of the day, it helped us again to just get that product out and focus on those key apps that we want people to create. Now that we understand the APIs that we want to build, it's time to start designing them. And the first thing that we need to understand about APIs is that they're very expensive to design, maintain, and evolve, because once those APIs are out in the wild and they're used by thousands of developers, they're very challenging to deprecate. Also, poorly designed APIs can make the ongoing evolution of core product difficult and sometimes impossible without deprecating it. So we realized that we need to be this conservative in our approach when designing our APIs and only expose the most powerful, the most stable, and the most composable building blocks of Canva. And it reminds me of a quote from our CTO, who said that code is temporary and data is forever. A variation by the ecosystem team or the Canva Apps SDK team is that code is temporary and an API is almost forever. For some reason, I think code is forever today. So as such, we introduced a set of overarching principles that boils down to 4 essential qualities. Firstly, simplicity. Inspired by the company's mission to empower the world to design, we want to make APIs as simple as possible without making them less powerful. Next, safety. As we've said earlier today, we have 135 million who trust Canva, and our API should not compromise their data. At the same time, these users have created 15 billion designs over the years, and all of those designs still render within the product. So those APIs should not corrupt any of the design data. Very important for us. And then evolvability. Decisions are expensive and time-consuming to undo, especially considering that poor APIs could couple internal product team development to those deprecation cycles, which could really slow us down. In the same way, we also want to design APIs in such a way that we can add more functionality to those APIs without having to introduce breaking changes. Again, very important for us. And finally, consistency. Because consistency is critical to ensure that developers are productive and delighted throughout the development lifecycle. And this also means that the API should be predictable so that learnings from one part of the API is transferable to others. Now, underpinning these principles, we realize that there is no perfect design, and there will always be cases where it is hard to adhere to all of these guidelines and these qualities. And as a general rule, we would rather postpone a new feature to the next release if we cannot preserve these qualities. I was actually a little scared when I wrote this principle the first time about a year ago. It's like, oh my God, are we going to actually do this? And I'm pleased to see how we've consistently made the right decision to defer APIs that weren't ready. And one of the cool things that we've done over the while is introduce preview APIs to get feedback from all of you as we go. So definitely use that as well. Now, finally, I'll talk about our API lifecycle before I close out and summarize the talk. As Brendan mentioned, at Canva, we work with small, highly cohesive, loosely coupled, and highly empowered teams to hit their crazy big goals. And while this approach optimizes for speed, it also biases teams to their goals and sometimes risk losing vision of using sight of a unified vision. And Brendan mentioned Conway's Law earlier, and this is an example of how that principle can manifest in a team. So to strike a balance between alignment and empowerment, we established an API design working group that consists of engineers at all levels from each team. And they were tasked to ensure that all of our APIs align with a consistent set of principles and guidelines and our overall vision. And much of this information is captured in our engineering handbook as well. And we were careful to avoid making this a higher authority that approve designs in an ivory tower. The goal is for us to empower engineers with generosity, empathy, and humility to build great APIs. An example of this is that early on, this working group introduced a run sheet that helps us track the essential stages of an API's lifecycle. For us, this run sheet puts the power back into the API product teams' hands to ensure that they're able to self-govern the critically essential stages of the API's lifecycle. Examples of this is rapid security risk assessments, where the teams self-evaluate must and should do security activities, designing the engagement model with the core product teams so that we work most efficiently with them, guidance on validating that we've built the correct API and that we've built the API right. And finally, some great templates on design docs, observability, analytics, and public announcements. And it's very cool to see how the team prepared around 20 of these run sheets in preparation for the Apps SDK launch event today. I think that's really cool. Using these run sheets in the design docs is consistent with Canva's engineering culture of thinking through problems and writing them down. And these docs are a great way of determining the primary considerations for sophisticated software designs. I love that. So in summary, let's have a look at some of these key lessons. First, with dog fooding our internal releases, releasing to preview developers early is often a great way for us to learn what works and what doesn't work. Also, by focusing on the essential product while still applying engineering excellence is a great way for us to get the product out early. And using something like archetypes helped us focus on what we really need and how we really needed to prioritize those APIs, again, for getting it out early. And also, the problematic APIs is much worse than missing a timeline. And finally, I just love the fact that we write these things down to help us think through the problems. So use design docs to gain clarity by writing things down. Also, I spoke about, and Brendan spoke about, how strong engineering values can be massively effective at scale. But for me, the one thing that's really important for us today is, how does this help our users? We have many Canva engineers here who are eager to live this value and understand from all of the engineers and app builders how we can best shape our APIs to help you enable your dreams. And also, go out there and start building apps for the 135 million users. Thank you very much.